Alrighty, I told you guys we'd be getting back to regular content, so here's... don't even get excited, it's no bullshit. This video was brought to you by the wonderful people on screen here who support me over at Patreon. If you want to support this channel and what I do, then please check the link in the description or the link at the end of the video. Alrighty, without further ado, let's go ahead and get the fan art out of the way. First, we have this piece by Ikakus, followed by my ever-present State of Stressed by Jack and Quill, and finally a dragon version of my character by Mudkip Mob. As always, thank you guys for the fan art, and let's get right into the video.
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit.
Good to be back. I took a week off, and now I'm here with you. Still not entirely sure how I should feel about that.
Today we return to talking about Marvel comic books, and how they're getting even more woke and pro-SJW once again. Previously, we've extensively talked about the new upcoming Marvel film releases, and how they've been getting more and more female-led and politically motivated too. And well, this trend actually comes from the comic books themselves as well. As the Marvel movies slowly turn more and more left-wing, the comic books and their writers have led this charge behind the scenes, and their sales have suffered because of it too.
Really? Well, as a comic books fan myself, would it be interesting for you to note that comics has been a pretty radically left-wing world for a long time? Especially where Marvel's concerned. No, seriously, look at the history behind the X-Men. It was literally an allegory for gay rights the entire time. I say that because Marvel's actually got a history of this. It's pretty long going. Anywho, no bullshit's illiteracy on the world of comic politics aside. Why don't we actually look at the numbers and see where Marvel is sitting currently? Because no bullshit has actually looked at those, right? The most recent ones we have are of 2018, and they're from Comic-Con, but why don't we go ahead and look at all the numbers from the last couple decades? And as you can see from this graph here, Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, and IDW have all been fairly sporadic. This is because the comics industry is always in a constant state of flux. What we can tell from the graph, though, is that Marvel's sales actually peaked in 2007, diminished slightly, and then peaked again in 2015, with an upward trend showing as of 2018. We're more than halfway through 2019, but I seriously doubt much has changed with the comics publisher in that time. So what we either have here is no bullshit lying about Marvel losing money on their comics end, or he's just pulling his information out of his ass and relying on intuition.
But woke Marvel comic book workers and writers have a unique advantage right now. They actually don't need to make money, since not only did Disney buy them out, but also the Marvel movies make more than enough to support the whole company overall.
And on the surface, that sounds very intuitive. It sounds correct. Hell, this is something Nintendo actually does. They make sure that they have one of their best sellers come out, and if that bestseller does well, it gives them extra money to fund projects that may not be as profitable. Things like Splatoon or the Metroid franchise, for instance. But again, looking at the Marvel Comics numbers in isolation, it looks like they're doing just fine. In fact, if we look at one of the more recent months, July 2019, in isolation as well, we find that Marvel is controlling 3 of the 5 top spots for comic book sales. Though, if we looked at the top 10 spots, we'd see that it's mostly all dominated by Batman, which is also not terribly surprising. If there's one thing DC can market, it's Batman. Hell, if we were to go down that sales list and try to locate Captain Marvel, we'd find that that comic book is actually outperforming Wolverine and Captain America, Teen Titans, and Iron Man. In overall dollar amounts, Marvel Comics controls 41% of the comics industry, and have 106 comics in the top 300 of published material, with DC coming in behind with 85. By the numbers, they seem to be performing exceptionally well, and Captain Marvel appears to be doing just fine. Anywho, back to you, Brooks.
This sort of free reign has also allowed the pro-SJW staff in comics to turn away from selling their works for profit, which means they don't have to give the people what they want anymore, at least somewhat. Now that the left-wingers controlling Marvel Comics have free reign, they've basically given up on trying to sell their work.
Over 32,000 units sold in 1 month, a consistent space in the top 300, outdoing Nightwing, Deathstroke, Sonic, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, Teen Titans, Justice League, Superman, and literally hundreds of others. Oh, sorry, there's one Superman comic that's actually outdoing Captain Marvel. Superman print number 13, which has Lois Lane on the front. What was this about? Female front leads actually causing problems for sales? I don't know, they must be living in some weird bizarro world.
Now they just want to push their liberal agendas no matter what.
This has literally been the state of the comics industry for decades. You're just getting very upset upset about it because it's trendy, and it's honestly one of the funniest things I've seen.
And they want to lady reboot and race swap every original character that they can, corrupting our comic book history.
Except swapping the race or the gender or anything of a character is no different than swapping their allegiance, which is something that's been happening with comic books for years as well. Red Sun Superman literally reimagined Superman as if he were a communist and he landed in Russia instead of the States. One of the Batman variants in Dark Knight's Metal is a female version of Batman. The Ultimate series has Miles Morales play Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker because canonically in that series, Peter dies. Jon Stewart got to be a Green Lantern over the original white guys Alan Scott and Hal Jordan since the 70s, and the only reason Captain Marvel got changed into a girl, multiple girls mind you, like Monica Rambeau and Carol Danvers, was because in the story the original Captain Marvel died of cancer. I could go on and on with the history of these swaps, but the fact of the matter is this has been happening for a while, and one of the reasons behind this is that the comics industry is prone to a lot of what-if stories. A lot of these side stories end up happening because the long-form narrative of the main series comics usually leads to a pretty sporadic and hard-to-follow continuity. Hell, just look at the multiple times DC has tried to reboot their series. The New 52 happened for a reason. Fact of the matter is, swapping like this of allegiance, race, gender, etc. has been happening for decades in the comics industry. And again, the only reason that you're getting upset about it now is because it's trendy to do so. I would love to lend your argument credence, but much like when you did your video breakdown of the Pokemon series, you seem to be so largely uninformed on this topic that I wonder why you're commenting. I seriously would have hated to see you during the launch of X-Men.
Previously, we've seen glimpses of this begin to come out in films too, as with the Captain Marvel movie release that was an adaptation of the Carol Danvers version of the character, who was actually a lady reboot of sorts of the original straight white male version of Captain Marvel.
Not so much a reboot, so much as a replacement since the original character died years ago. And again, there have been several female Captain Marvels since then, for the same reason that Peter Parker doesn't play Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. He's dead. For the same reason that Damian plays Nightwing in the Injustice universe. Because Dick Grayson's dead. Funny how that happens when in your story a character dies and then they get replaced so that you can still have the slot filled.
There's also a Miss Marvel show that's on its way to Disney Plus now too, and even another She-Hulk series as well. Yes, lady reboots and gender-swapping characters are getting real common now.
Wow, this is proof you're comic illiterate. She-Hulk is a separate character to Bruce Banner's Hulk. There's also Red Hulk. Do you seriously think that She-Hulk is some type of reboot? It's an entirely canonically different character. Again, one who's existed in the comics for decades. This is honestly hysterical. This character has existed since 1980. That's 12 years before I was born. I'm sorry that my voice is cracking. This is just one of the most hilarious episodes I've ever had to produce. Oh my god, thank you so much, No Bullshit. I haven't gotten laughter like this in a while. I've needed this.
Despite not being that popular or well-liked or received by the public at all. That brings us to today's news story. Back to the comics, and we can see that there's now an all-female villain team, and you'll never believe what they're taking aim at in their new issues. An article from CBR.com has more details. It's called Marvel's All-Female Villain Team Takes Aim at Toxic Masculinity.
Wait, hold on. So you're going to be going over the CBR article instead of reading the comic yourself and coming to your own conclusion. Are you one of those types of people that gets your comic information filtered through news articles? Like, instead of actually reading any of the newest stories that have happened in your favorite comic book universes? Or do you just wait until the Daily Wire bitches about diversity killing our comic book casts? I'd say learn to read a book, but that's the only obvious joke here besides you.
Wow, what a title. And from this picture already, I could see at least two of the team members are just female versions of other, more popular male villains. Clearly, the one on the left is a lady version of Dr. Octopus, and the one on the right is a femme Electra.
So the character on the left appears to be Lady Octopus, who's actually an incredibly old character as well, seeing as they stemmed from the Clone Wars saga, one of the most universally hated Spider-Man series of all time. And then your character on the right is Lady Electro, who was introduced in 2014 and was a regular accomplice of Electro. Ironically enough, they actually inherited their powers after Dr. Octavius himself ended up screwing with Electro's equipment. Now, it's kind of a complicated story. She kissed Electro and got fried to death and then got fracked to life by the Jackal, and technically she was brought back as a clone, but the DNA on her cheek that was harvested to make the clone had the spittle from Electro, causing the DNA to get mixed up and giving her some of his powers. I don't know, it's weird. Comics are weird. Point being, these are not recent characters. This is not a recent phenomenon. And these are not retoolings of the same characters. They are separate characters altogether who have existed canonically in the universe with their male counterparts. This is not, what was it that you called it? Destruction of comic book history? God, you're an alarmist.
We'll see what the others end up being, but this is not a good start at all. SJWs have never been good at writing or coming up with new ideas, so it's not surprising that a good amount of their female villain team is just knockoff female versions of popular male villains.
You mean separate characters who have existed in the exact same storylines? Much like how Dick Grayson's Batman is not a knockoff of Bruce Wayne, it's a character that had to be a stand-in when Bruce was considered dead. Or how Guy Gardner, Jon Stewart, and literally every other Earth-centered Green Lantern isn't a knockoff of Hal Jordan. They are separate characters. Or how the previously mentioned Miles Morales is not a knockoff of Peter Parker. They largely have a different story than Peter. And again, exist in the same universe as Peter. Seriously, have you ever read a comic book? Have you ever picked one up? Like, looked at the pages and read the words? Because I'm willing to give you the charity and say that you have, you're just talking out of your ass here, but I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't, given how illiterate you seem to be on their history. I'm not asking you to be an expert, I'm asking you not to be an idiot.
And back to this title again, and this all-female villain team is taking aim at toxic masculinity, so does that make toxic masculinity the good guy then? Wouldn't they be the heroes since they're going up against villains?
I don't know, are you gonna actually read the comic book and see if this is actually a charitable portrayal of what's going on in that particular universe?
I would certainly think so, but I also wouldn't use a term like toxic masculinity in a serious way whatsoever. Really, toxic masculinity is just a way for liberals to bash men, and to call us toxic or evil or something like that.
Huh. So you have no idea what a liberal is either. If we actually look at the Overton window here in the States, it seems like people who call themselves liberals may be left by the state standards, but everywhere else they would be the equivalent of a political centrist. But not all liberals are that way, and that's not my point. Let's actually focus on that whole toxic masculinity thing. Do you even understand that concept? Because it's not the concept that men are toxic and therefore masculinity is toxic. It's the idea that there are aspects of masculinity that we have considered positive pillars over time that are actually toxic when looked at with even an iota of scrutiny. Things like not crying in front of people, an act that actually causes bottling of emotion and then causes issues with anger later on down the road. What we see as silent stoicism in the face of what should be sadness is actually damaging to the people involved. That's what toxic masculinity refers to. Also, I recognize there are some people who take the idea too far, but the mere fact that there are people that take the idea of toxic masculinity so far that it's absurd doesn't change what the word means, and it doesn't mean hating all men. But you can't even read comic books, so why do I expect you to be able to read into this?
We're not though, and we're not hurtful or toxic. Toxic is just a buzzword itself.
Hey, here's a thought. Can't toxic be both a buzzword and also be a legitimate thing? I mean, aside from being a TM in Pokemon. What I mean to say is, can't toxic be both a buzzword, which means it's a good political weapon or tool, while also being a signifier of an actual underlying issue? One that can be both used as a tool and be legitimate. No? That too hot of a take for you? I guess you've never played League of Legends before. There's where you learn that toxic is both a buzzword and an actual fucking problem.
And we better see some pretty good examples in this article to uphold this bullshit of a claim that I think will fall down like a house of cards. Marvel's The Amazing Spider-Man is changing the dynamic of Peter Parker's social circle in a huge way as he's been forced to defend his roommate Boomerang from the new incarnation of the Syndicate, an all-female crew sent by Wilson Fisk to kidnap him. But while the latest chapter sees the team pursuing Boomerang to undoubtedly score a major payday, we eventually discover a common ambition the members share. They want to bring down the patriarchy and, more so, take a shot against toxic masculinity in a New York that they believe should have more women in power.
Okay. And they're being portrayed as the villains. More so, they're being paid to do this by Fisk. You know, Kingpin, who's a guy. Wait, hold on a second. This whole recent women in power issue reminds me. Have you actually read Wonder Woman?
Well, if you really want more women in power, there's a normal, legal way you can get that done, ladies. Create viable female candidates, promote them during elections, and get the people to vote for women. Or if it's business and financial power you're after, you can always start your own business and make some money and build a successful company. At least that's how it's supposed to be done. That's how the men who got into power got it done too, by the way. But the SJWs clearly don't want to play fair here, nor do they they want to put in the hard work or effort. That's why they write comics like this, where they fantasize about all female groups of villains, a group of superpowered women who are going to go around New York and attack men who really did nothing wrong.
What? That's what you get from that? Oh my god. I forgot. I'm watching a no bullshit video. News flash. They're not going to play fair. They are villains. What a nightmarishly strange concept that the villains in the comic book story would not be playing by the rules. I know that I personally do sure love reading my comic books where the villains play nice and by the rules. Because villains like the Joker and Sinestro, Kingpin, and Black Mask are notorious for playing by the rules of their established comic book societies. This is very much one of those things I read comic books for. Villains who play by the rules.
Now, we already went over how toxic masculinity is bullshit. It's just a way for lefties to bash men because they prefer women and LGBT people over all others.
Ah, yes, the brokest of woke takes. LGBT people cannot be men. Because your statement, sloppily worded as it was, is that they prefer women and LGBT people in power instead of men. Do you check your script? Like, is that a thing you do? Do you read over it? Do you decide that you actually want to keep that in there? Because, like, I don't have a script, and I don't think I screw up that bad. If I screw up that bad, please let me know in the comments section below.
But next, let's talk about the patriarchy bullshit. This implies that men have all the power in our country, and they also got it in unfair, possibly illegal ways.
What? That's not what that means. A patriarchy just implies that men are in charge. We have a male president. We have 80% representation of males in Congress. So yeah, by definition, our country is patriarchal. It is male dominated. That is where the power is. It doesn't say that people got that power unfairly. It just says that that's where the power happens to be circumstantially. I mean, I'm sorry that facts don't care about your feelings here. I know that you want these things to be buzzwords so that you can strike them down. You need these desperately to be broken woke takes, but the reality is you do live in a style of patriarchy. As far as governors of states are concerned, we only have 9 governors that are currently female. Again, this doesn't say that the men didn't get those spots fair and square. They did. It's just, again, circumstantially the case that 41 states have male governors and 9 states have female governors. That power imbalance is why there are people who say that we live in a patriarchy. That's not me saying we need to elect more women simply because they're women. This is just me pointing out that the current circumstance is that we have more men in power. That's just how things are. Doesn't mean it should be that way. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be that way.
But this is not true here at all. The men in power here earn their positions by either winning votes in elections or building companies and industries and amassing wealth and influence over time. So to take away power from these people who got it for themselves in fair and square ways, well, that suggestion is actually what's offensive here.
Oh, so now you're offended when it's a comic book that has boobs. And the fictional characters who have those boobs, who are villains, mind you, have an opinion that differs from yours. When your opinion is so sloppily constructed that none of the words you use mean what you think they mean. But even if they did, you're offended that a villain in a comic book has a different opinion than you. Please never read any comic that has Dr. Light in it. If you're an avid comic book reader, you know what I'm referring to.
Not only are they suggesting we strip people of their own assets and positions in companies they own and or founded, but also they want to replace duly elected government officials who won their political offices by getting votes from the people. So with that said, the left is essentially saying they know better than all of us, and they have a right to take away money and assets from people if they don't like your demographic.
Yeah, that's not what this article has said so far. Moreover, it sounds like you tried to kind of skate around the whole seizing the means of production thing that is actually a talking point on the left. The actual left, not the American left, but like actual communists and socialists. Because seizing the means of production for the people is normally a thing that you advocate for on that side. There are many ways that means of production could be seized, and that seems to be what you're talking about here, but not in so many words. So it just looks like you sloppily interjected it here, without any thought. whatsoever through the frame of a fictional set of villains you disagree with, which narratively you're supposed to disagree with the villains. Even when you agree with the villains, you are supposed to ultimately disagree with their methods, i.e. current iterations of Thanos and Killmonger.
And even worse, they think they can take politicians out of power, even though they are the ones who the citizens voted for.
Oh boy, have you ever heard of the concept of impeachment? Please don't look back at United States history and look at President Nixon. The citizens voting for a politician does not automatically mean that politician deserves to be in that spot. But anyways, I feel like I have to keep iterating this point over and over and over again. You're getting upset about the opinion of a villain, a set of villains in a comic book. Are you okay?
Basically saying our votes don't count according to SJWs.
How? How? How is that what you get from that? How is that a charitable read? You know what? Actually, Raz, I'm gonna need you to hit me with this hammer so hard I forget I'm doing a no bullshit video.